Initiation by Elisabeth Haich, Chapter 12, The Past Awakens. When I left Aunt Raphaela's and returned home following the breaking off of my engagement, summer had come. I was 19 years old and wanted to enjoy my freedom. At last I could see other young people without having to risk a terrible scene for my jealous fiancé. On my return, I went straight to the local tennis courts. On the first day, I met a very attractive, trim-looking young man. His bearing and manner were most charming. He had a good-looking head on his shoulders, a well-built, slim, muscular body, and always turned up in flawless white tennis slacks and jersey. I took to him from the first moment, and he seemed to like me too. On our third day, one of our teammates, rather unhappily, cracked her tennis racket over the head of our male ball boy. He began to cry bitterly. The sympathetic young man threw his racket away, ran up to the little boy, took him on his lap, and started to comfort him. He didn't seem to mind the boys dirtying his immaculate tennis clothes at all. He stroked his head and dried his eyes and gave him some money. In fact, in a matter of moments, the boy started to smile through his tears and ran off to the counter to buy some sweets. My heart went out to him. Are there really such young men, I thought, who have a little compassion? I began to love him. In the following winter, I became engaged to him. We loved one another deeply and passionately, and I could hardly wait for the moment when I was to become his wife, with body and soul, with every part of my being. My father wanted me to finish my studies before my marriage, and I still had 1 year left to go at the music academy. So we had to wait, and I continued to practice daily for 4 to 5 hours, learn the laws of harmony, play chamber music, and do everything I could towards passing the exams. My fiancé spent every evening at our house. One evening, when he had left, I went to sleep and I fell fast asleep. I slept, and as usual, I dreamt of many things in a chaotic and senseless manner. Suddenly, I began to hear a strange sound, which repeated itself in a rhythmical way, a kind of snapping noise which became louder and louder, till I abruptly regained consciousness and awoke. I opened my eyes and noticed that the rhythmical sound is coming from the whip of a slave driver who is marching beside me and cracking his whip to keep all the slaves who are pulling me in step. I am reclining on something, like a sledge on rails, which slides along slowly. I realize that I'm being taken away from the palace. A moment ago I heard the doors being closed. I want to jump up, but I find I cannot. I am unable to move a muscle, because I am wrapped up so tightly from my neck right down to my feet. I am lying there as though hewn out of a piece of marble, my hands crossed over my chest, my legs stretched out side by side. From this position, I can only look straight ahead or gaze upward. Looking in the direction of my feet in the brilliant sunlight, I see the naked, perspiring backs of the men who are pulling me on in a continuous movement. Above and beyond them, in the distance, a white stone building looms up. A black cavity seems to mark an entrance. In the gleaming white light, the walls of the building stand out starkly against the dark blue sky. As the slaves continue forward, the building seems to approach, and the back cavity becomes larger and larger. The sky above is so intensely blue, it seems almost black. 2 large birds circle slowly overhead. Storks or cranes? The stone building suddenly appears to be very near. The black cavity yawns wide. Yes, it really is an opening, and now I recognize it. We are in the city of the dead. This is a tomb. We arrive, the slaves enter and disappear into the darkness. Now the cavity engulfs me, and suddenly the world around me becomes black. After the blinding sunshine outside, everything is gone. I am in complete darkness. A terrible fear grips me, and silently I search for an answer to the question, how long must I stay here, a prisoner? Clearly I hear a familiar voice calmly and imperturbably telling me its inexorable will. 3,000 years. Terror grips me anew, and consciousness fades into oblivion. Somebody was shaking me roughly. I looked up and saw the eyes of my sister. She gripped me and she stared at me in sheer fright. "For goodness sake," she said, "what on earth is wrong with you? You sit here with a vacant look in your eyes and you groan terribly as though you were going to die. Are you feeling ill? Shall I call Mother?" I felt I wanted to answer, but I could not utter a single sound. The terrible experience that I had just been through paralyzed every part of my body. I groaned and waved my hand to reassure her that all was well. Then I stretched out again and tried to think, but even that was impossible. I lay there still panic-stricken, and some minutes went by before my heart started to beat normally again, and before I began to calm down and realize who I was and where I was. My sister stayed near me for a while, and then noticing that I had regained my senses, she repeated her questions. "Can I do anything for you?" At last I managed to croak, "No, thank you. I'm all right." Next day I tried to collect my scattered thoughts and review the position. What had I seen? What had I experienced during the night? It looked like a vision of the future, but it could hardly be my own future. In my visions of the future, I always remained the same person. But in this vision, I was someone completely different. I gazed at myself in the mirror for a long time, tried to understand how it was possible that one human being can be two persons at the same time. For I am here. This I can see in the mirror, yet there exists another picture of me, one I saw in another mirror, an enormous silver mirror, at the same time when I was the other person. I am the being who is here, yet simultaneously I am the other being who is buried in a tomb. In only a few minutes I had the experience of being someone who knows exactly who he is, where he belongs, in fact, who lives his life consciously, as does everyone, whether he reflects upon it or not. Suddenly I grasped the memories of a life, a home, and realized that as a child I had searched for this home, where I really belonged, and that I knew the great one in quotes, my father and husband, to be my real father. As the years had passed, I had become accustomed to my present position, to accepting the fact that my present father and mother were my true parents. Somehow, however, the strange feeling had never left me, and now I felt it very strongly. Yet it was queer that many things which I had then experienced in the past had seemed quite normal, now struck me as being very abnormal. The two concepts contrasted strongly with each other. To take an example, I found it completely correct. In fact, I was honored to be the daughter and the wife of my father, the Pharaoh. Yet now I became conscious of the fact that, and I felt deeply shocked, for the moral standards of my time were quite different. Yet, at the time of my ancient existence, this was looked upon as being quite normal, for if the wife of a pharaoh dies and he had no sisters, the accepted procedure was to make his own daughter his wife. He could never have placed a woman who did not belong to the family over his own daughter, who was born in the family of a pharaoh, and who else but his daughter could have sat beside him as his queen and regal wife, if not the next female member of the family in line of descent. It would have been immoral to introduce a woman of lower heritage into the family. I remembered many things, especially the temple, where I often went, yet many things remained blurred, such as the reason why I was so vigorously bound down in my coffin. Why was I taken to the tomb? And whom did that voice remembered so well belong to? Whom? A barrier blocked this part of my past, and if I tried to recall anything, something like an electric shock pushed me back. I could not think in reverse. As we were sitting at the family table the next morning, I said to my father, "Father, in school we learned that the pyramids were the burial places of the ancient kings. That's not true. Not all the pyramids were graves. Some of them were used for quite different purposes. The dead were buried outside the city in a special burial city. They were carried out of town in coffins, very similar to sledges, where they were then immured in large buildings. The tombs were closed with stone doors." My father gave me an astonished look and said, "How on earth can you know that, when all the scientists agree that the pyramids were the tombs of the pharaohs, yet never mention a city of the dead?" "I'm quite sure, Father, that this is the way it is," I said, knowing what I had seen to be true. "Well, tell us how you know," he said, and everybody gazed at me expectantly. "I know it, yet I cannot explain it," I said, and I told them of my vision. My father listened attentively and noticed that even then I shivered with fright when I recalled the experience. Seeing that I was obviously telling something I had taken part in, he replied, "In Hamlet, Shakespeare says, 'There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.' Nowadays people talk about inherited memories, a thing I do not believe in. I'd like to know how the history of the whole family, containing innumerable ancestors, can be contained in one minute living cell. Scientists evolve great theories which change about every 20 years. I don't advise you to worry about these things, and don't think about your dream or your vision, whatever you want to call it. It would simply disturb your mental balance. Maybe you read something about the subject in some paper?" "No, Father, I have never read or heard anything about Egypt except what they taught us at school. It never really interested me, yet in school I learned things which were completely different from my experiences in my vision. I cannot explain what this vision should mean, for I am absolutely certain that the facts I witnessed were correct in detail. I'm also certain that the person I was in my dream existed, yet I cannot explain how I can be this person in the present. Who was that other person? I don't understand. Can it be possible that human beings live more than once?" "May I have some fruit?" my father said, turning to my mother. The fruit was brought to the table, and the family talked about other matters. When I went to bed that night, I wondered whether the dream would repeat itself, but it didn't. I waited for many days. I even tried to dream myself back into the strange world, but all to no avail. The dream didn't return. As time passed, I ceased thinking about it. My healthy attitude towards life drove me on with fresh vigor. I practiced at the piano, painted pictures, learned my lessons, and spent each evening with my fiancé. And so the year went by.